My name's Anthony Salas. I'm the Membership and Event Manager with Welcoming America. And again, we're super thrilled to have all of you join us for this really important series of workshops. We know language access is one of, if not the most important thing that many of us are dealing with right now. And we're just really honored to be able to bring this to you, and really honored to have Mary Jane McCullough joining us to lead us through this. Some of you may have been a part of the workshops that we did back in 2020. If you were, welcome back. And if you're new, obviously we're doing this again because it went so well and people got so much out of those. So hopefully you will find that to be the case as well. So thank you for that. A couple of quick things before I turn it over to Mary Jane. One, this being the first of the workshops, you know they're happening every second Wednesday of the month between now and November. Each one will be recorded. So we are in the process right now of recording. Within about 48 hours of every workshop, I will be posting these to the digital library in the member forum. I will follow up with an email with the link where you'll need to go to access. But if you do want to go back and either revisit a past workshop, or if you missed one, you can go back and revisit it. You'll know exactly where to go and get that. And then finally, everyone should have received the calendar invites for all 10 of the workshops coming up. Just make sure you have accepted all of those, so those will be added to your calendar and you'll get those reminders as we go forward. So with that, again, I want to share that we are very honored to have Mary Jane McCullough from Global Wordsmiths joining us again to share her expertise and knowledge in regards to language access. And so with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn things over to her. Oh, muted.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Anthony. I'm really happy to be here. And I appreciate so much that you guys are here to listen to me talk about language access for an hour. Before I start my slides, I want to remind everybody that the way these workshops are structured is they're kind of in sets of 3, where there is a beginner, an intermediate, and then an advanced level conversation about language access. So this is the very beginning level. It's also very similar to a similar workshop we did last year. It's very much just an introduction to language access and a discussion about why language access is so important. So I just want to say that if you find that you've got more experience and that you don't want to stick around for a whole hour and hear about the very basics, I'm not going to be offended at all if you have to hop off. And with that being said, I think that this conversation is really important because it's a very foundational one in terms of the way we approach language access work, right? We're going to talk about why language access is so important and what it feels like to be an English learner. So I hope you'll find it interesting. I'm going to do 35 to 40 minutes of just presentation, and then we'll use the rest of the time to discuss and to do questions. I'll try to get through the presentation part a little bit quicker so that we have more time to talk, because I think that's where like the meat of these conversations really happens. So like I said, if you need to slip away because you find that this is not helpful, the next workshop will be a more intermediate workshop that dives into some more practical skills. And for now, we're going to talk about defining language justice. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here with you. And what the purpose of today's workshop is basically, given that Welcoming America members have a range of understanding of language access resources, language access best practices, language access experience, this workshop is really designed to kind of give newcomers to this work a really solid foundation for kind of advancing language justice. So we're going to cover basic concepts, definitions, and really understanding that English learner experience to create sort of a basis of common knowledge for future workshops. So, I hope that all of you are able to gain new perspective and helpful practical information from this, no matter where you are in your language access work, so to speak. So if this is new to you, please don't hesitate to ask questions about any of the vocabulary or the information or the resources that I share here. If you do have lots of experience with language access, please also feel free to participate and to share your experiences, your successes, your failures with the group, because I think that learning from each other is very powerful in this context, right? Because we're all so committed to the work that we're doing. My hope for these presentations is that they can be discussions, not just like hour-long, narrated slide decks. So, please do participate. I welcome your questions, your input. Even if you find that you have something to say that contradicts what I'm saying, it's valuable and I welcome it. So please do interject, use the chat box to speak up at any point during these presentations. Like we said before, this is the first in a series. These are going to be happening on the second Tuesday of every month. And I'm really excited about that. And I think that through this program, Welcoming America is really helping participants to get sort of a holistic conceptual knowledge of language access, as well as some of the applied skills that you're going to need to improve your language accessibility infrastructure. So in this lesson, I'm going to just introduce some key concepts and facilitate some guided discussion designed to root our understanding of language access and language justice in empathy, right? I think that's really important. So we're going to cover, what is language access? We're going to talk about some basic definitions. We're going to talk about what the law says. And we're also going to talk about what that looks like and feels like from the perspective of the lived experiences of people, right? Understanding the English learner experience through guided discussion, I think, is another important part of this, because I think we tend to, as people, underestimate how difficult it is for people when they don't have the ability to communicate, to interact with the products and services that we provide. So this is a great opportunity for us to just pause and sort of think about that. To give you an idea of my qualifications to even be talking about this and who I am, I'm the founder and director of a social enterprise called Global Wordsmiths. We are a service provider, so we provide and sell translation, interpretation, training, consulting, but then all of the profits that we make are used to run social impact initiatives that are designed to improve language accessibility and to provide free language access services for nonprofits, so that the services provided by those nonprofits can be made available to English learners. I'm also an adjunct faculty lecturer of applied translation and translation technologies at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm the co-chair of the Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition Board of Directors, and I sit on several advisory boards, both nationally and locally, about language access specifically. So my whole job is to language access and to advance the narrative of language access. I'm also a trained Spanish translator and interpreter. I lived abroad for about 6 years and studied at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, as well as the University of Pittsburgh, to become a translator, interpreter, and then kind of started doing advocacy work just based on what I was seeing in the field when I was an interpreter. So I feel like my perspective can benefit everybody, because I come from a background of somebody who has seen sort of all sides of this, right? I've worked with families in the field, I've been an executive, I've been a teacher, I've been a student, and I've just kind of seen it from all angles in terms of language access. So I hope that experience can be helpful to you, and I encourage you to ask me anything that you would like. So with that being said, I want to start at the very beginning for the benefit of those of you who do not have prior experience with language access, and share just a few terms and definitions that you're going to hear throughout all of the workshops that I present, and just in the field in general. So basically, I wouldn't focus too much on like taking notes right now on anything like this, because like Anthony said, these are all going to be recorded and you'll be able to refer back to these slides at any time. But most of these definitions are sourced from the federal government's lep.gov site, and others have been created by me or collected by me. I want to take a brief minute to talk about the terms LEP and English learner. So lep.gov is the sort of government resource through the Department of Justice that has information about language accessibility. And the term LEP stands for Limited English Proficient. This is a term that is widely accepted as like the legal term for somebody who is learning English as a second language or who does not speak English. But it's also very derogatory and very negative, right? When we talk about somebody as being limited, we're automatically forming biases in our minds about the way we think about people and the way we treat people, right? So I like to refer to people, and there's a growing movement of people who refer to English learners as English learners, because this is a much more positive way to talk about somebody, right? And I think that even as well-meaning advocates, it's very easy for us to kind of fall into the trope of viewing English learning immigrants and refugees as, you know, needy or, you know, needing to be saved by us, or as not being capable. But really, these are capable human beings who don't need us to save them. They just need equitable access to services, right, and to resources. And so even just framing the way we talk about people can reframe the way we think about people, and I think is really important in this work. So with that being said, you'll hear me use the terms interchangeably. Sometimes the legal word is the right way to say it. Most of the time I say English learner, but I wanted to point that out before we get into these workshops, just so that you were all on the same page as I am. So these are some really common definitions in the field of language access. The first is effective communication. This is a term that's used to refer to communication that is sufficient to provide, and I'm just reading these directly from the lep.gov website here. This communication that's sufficient to provide the LEP individual with substantially the same level of access to services received by individuals who are not limited English proficient. For example, staff must take reasonable steps to ensure communication with an LEP individual is as effective as communications with others when providing similar programs and services. The second definition is limited English proficient individual. This is sort of the federal and legal definition. Individuals who do not speak English as their primary language and who have a limited ability to read, speak, or understand English. LEP individuals may be competent in English for certain types of communication, you know, like speaking and understanding, but still be limited English proficient for other purposes, such as reading or writing. The third is English learners, which is the term I just described. It's the same as above, but it's a much better and more positive term to use. Meaningful access is language assistance that results in accurate, timely, and effective communication at no cost to the LEP individual. A bilingual helper, this is one of my terms, and this is I use to refer to a staff person or employee who has demonstrated proficiency in English, reading, writing, speaking, or understanding, and as well as in one or more other languages. So for LEP individuals, meaningful access denotes access that is not significantly restricted, delayed, or inferior as compared to programs or activities provided to English proficient individuals. So that means that if you're using a bilingual helper, this is a person who's bilingual but doesn't necessarily have training, you know, professional training as an interpreter or a translator. So you want to make sure that you're able to provide this meaningful access to somebody who is receiving services, if it's through a bilingual volunteer or a bilingual helper. The next term is qualified translator or interpreter. So in contrast, an in-house or contracted translator or interpreter who has training or qualifications and competence to interpret or translate, like through court certification, or who is authorized to do so, you know, or by approval of his or her organization somehow. So this is a person who has some training and real credentials to be able to provide meaningful access to services. And then finally, a vital document. This is a paper or electronic written material that contains information that is critical for accessing a component's program or activities as required by law. So vital document is an important one, and it comes up a lot because not everybody has an unlimited budget for translations, right? And so if you are a government or a nonprofit and you have a tiny budget, you have to prioritize which documents you're going to translate versus which documents you are not going to translate. And by law, anything considered vital documentation is required to be translated by any recipient of federal funding. So that could even be a doctor's office that accepts Medicaid, right? That's considered a recipient of federal funding. And, they would therefore be required by law to provide meaningful access to services by translating vital documents. You'll hear the term vital document come up a lot in my workshops and just in the conversation about language access in general. So be on the lookout for that one. So, now that we understand some basic concepts, it's time to kind of jump into this concept of what is language access, right? Language access on paper is defined by the US Department of Health and Human Services simply as what is achieved when individuals who have limited English proficiency can communicate effectively with your program staff and participate in your programs and activities, right? So like we said, LEP is this term that's most frequently used by government lawmakers, but I much prefer the term English learner. So since immigrant and refugee communities are often lumped together as these kind of needy or unfortunate or marginalized groups, it's really important to pay attention to that distinction as advocates, because we don't want to fall into that trope and end up inadvertently missing the mark when we're trying to have meaningful and inclusive conversation with English learners. So this is kind of where the concept of language justice starts, right? It starts with kind of checking our thought patterns in our own advocacy work, in our own services, in our own policy work. It's not just access to services, it's relationships. It's the way we think about and talk about people. It's the way we root our advocacy work, right? So this is language justice, and, it's a procedural term. It's a legal term. It's a set of best practices or policies. Language justice is really social justice. It's equal access, it's equitable access, it's human access to the services that people need to survive and to thrive. It's integration, it is leveling the playing field, and it's our shared responsibility. It's actionable, it's urgent, it's extremely vital. And I'm gonna actually ask for your participation now. So if you guys aren't with me and you aren't paying attention, it's time to pop back on screen. And I think, to really think about what it means to be an English learner in this country, I want to hear from all of you. And so if you can unmute yourselves and just kind of say out loud, share with the group, what do you think are situations or services in which you think language might be a barrier, right? What are some everyday services that you need or that you use that would be difficult to access without language support, right? So deep dive stuff. So not just healthcare, but like mental health services or prenatal healthcare, right? For example, food banks or, job search assistance or renting an apartment. What are some of your thoughts here?
Children's and family court.
Children's and family court, definitely. And not even just figuring out how to get to a physical hearing, but understanding why the hearing is happening, having access to legal representation, right?
And
emergency calls.
Emergency calls, yeah, public safety, 911, as well as EMS, fire services.
immigration appointments and interviews.
Yep, absolutely. Immigration appointments and interviews is super important. And for those of you who do advocacy work in that department, the federal government is absolutely required to provide interpreters at visa hearings and USCIS appointments, but they often do not. And so it's important that we advocate and we tell them that they have to, or that we equip our English learning friends and community members that they have the legal right to an interpreter and how to fight for that. But yes, absolutely immigration hearings. What about just general legal representation? PFAs, right? Protection from abuse orders.
Evictions.
Evictions, yeah. Understanding your lease terms from the beginning, right? Being able to read your lease and understand for what reasons you might be evicted or what your responsibilities as a tenant are. And then to understand what resources are available to you to prevent eviction or to fight back against eviction.
Mary Jane, this is Anthony. I'm going to jump in and share. Somebody in the chat entered an option here, which I think is very timely, which is COVID vaccines and appointment scheduling, which is something that I think a lot of us are looking at right now too.
Absolutely. In Pittsburgh, there's an organization called Casa San Jose that has an army of people on the ground who are helping Spanish-speaking families make vaccine appointments because it's just impossible to do it without language support, right? And that's the case too for when you think about making any kind of medical appointment. I know in Pittsburgh, our biggest healthcare providers have these phone messaging services or like answering services to even make an appointment with like a dermatologist or a mental health care provider or a prenatal visit. You have to call and be on hold and understand the menus and talk to somebody who's in central scheduling who doesn't speak any language other than English. And there's really just no way to do that unless somebody who does speak English helps in that situation here. So what else? Do you guys have any other examples before we move on?
Just going to say just general applications. So it could be membership application or anything like that also.
Yeah, membership applications, benefit applications, talking to your kids' teachers. Sorry, go ahead.
Calling to insurance related to the medical bill or any kind of bill.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
City services or city programs that are available to the community.
Yes. These are all really great answers. So you see on the slide here that, language access is social justice, it's equity, and it's integration, right? It touches every part of a person's life: education, finance, food security, medical care. And here are just some more examples. Some of the ones you said are on here. There are some that aren't on here. I have community norms. I know that we have some large refugee populations who do things like burn garbage in small urban neighborhoods, which some neighbors don't like, which, that's a whole nother can of worms. But being able to communicate to people that there is, a weekly garbage pickup, right? Resources and connections in general, social services, case management services, public benefits, driver's licensing is a huge one. Navigating home ownership, small business opening, financial services, being able to access libraries and cultural institutions, really anything you can imagine is on here, right? And these are just a very abbreviated look at kind of what it's like to navigate life as an English learner. And because it is so difficult to access services, one by one, sort of every day, English learners just become exhausted, right? And this can kind of cause them to withdraw. And as a result, a lot of the times people stop attempting to access services at all. I mean, we see mothers who come into the emergency room to give birth having never had a prenatal appointment of any kind, right? We see that sort of stuff a lot. We see much higher rates of preventable illness in difficult to reach populations because they're just not getting screenings and vaccines and things like that because it's so difficult to them and they've withdrawn so much. They, then kind of become harder to reach, and it turns into like a feedback loop that affects outcomes for everybody, right? Not just those who are most affected by language isolation. It is bad for entire communities and entire regions. So this is what language justice means, right? It's fighting hard to break that feedback loop by leading and by doing the hard work of building language access infrastructure, right? And as organizations and people in positions of leadership here, that's the one thing I hope to impart on you today is just that it's our responsibility to really lead this work and to really work hard to make sure that these services are not so difficult for people and to make sure that we start building relationships, not just doing blanket community outreach, but like actually going into communities and listening and building relationships that are language accessible so that people start to come out of the shadows and start to come in from between the cracks. Okay. So in addition to being social justice, in addition to being the right thing to do, language access is also the law, right? And a lot of the times people aren't really familiar with this. So sometimes funders and decision makers aren't really compelled to act on language access issues or to fund language access programs based on, social justice alone for a number of reasons. We'll discuss those, reasons and how to advocate for language accessibility measures in a later workshop. But for now, with any kind of basic discussion of language access, we have to talk about the legal basis. And there are three main pieces of legislation that mandate that reasonable actions to provide meaningful access have to be provided by any program that receives federal funding, basically. So the three main pieces of legislation that mandate language accommodations are Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin for any program or activity that receives federal funding assistance. Executive Order 13166 holds federal agencies to the same standard as recipients of federal funding and requires that federal agencies work to ensure that recipients of federal funding provide meaningful access to English learners. And then Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act also prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability in health programs or activities, any part of which receive federal funding. So these all have held up in court, and there has been much legal precedent to reaffirm these legal bases for language access. So they're very solid. And it's really, if you think about it from a purely legal perspective, I like to kind of compare it to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So obviously not speaking English is not a physical disability, but the legal framework is a really interesting comparison because both are federally mandated and the problems are very similar, right? So for example, if you're a member of the deaf community and you go to a hospital, you'll immediately be accommodated with an interpreter. If you're a Swahili speaking patient at the same hospital, it will be much, much, much more difficult to receive language accommodations, if at all. Right. And this is because there is a culture of accessibility and a culture of legal enforcement around the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 1990, when the ADA was newly enacted, we were fighting this fight to convince hospital administrators and governments why wheelchair accessibility is a thing, right? And why ASL interpreters are required and how to create accessible spaces in that context. So understanding language justice and language access and the legal basis for both are kind of the first steps in advancing that same culture of language justice in our communities, our governments, our hospitals, our organizations, right? You wouldn't sit by and watch if a hospital put plywood over a stairwell and called it a wheelchair ramp, right? So similarly, we should learn to help others learn that children should not be used to interpret for their families, for example, right? Okay. So I want to wrap up the slide portion of this workshop with kind of the second part of the guided discussion about what it really feels like to be an English learner, right? You guys participated and shared a little bit about, what you felt were some situations in which language might be important. And, now I want to kind of have one other discussion, and afterward we can use the time that's left over to do some Q&A. And then also please remember that you guys are welcome to schedule one-on-one counseling sessions with me or coaching sessions with me also through Welcoming America. So if this presentation or any of the other workshops kind of get your mind going and you have some questions or some deep dive stuff that you need some help with, please feel free to reach out to me as a resource. So I asked earlier for you to think about, what are some situations in which communication would be important? Now I would love for you to share with me a time in your life when you didn't feel that you were understood, or that you didn't feel like you could communicate, or like you had a voice, right? So I love to do this exercise because I get such a different variety of answers from people. And I always say, I'm interested in the story, but what I'm most interested in hearing from you is how it made you feel. Right. So a story I always share, it's kind of funny. I had just moved to Mexico City, and people speak, very colloquial Spanish in Mexico City. It's this massive city of 20 million people, 24 million people, I think, actually, at this point. And I was just lost. And I was at a party. I was trying to tell people that I was embarrassed by my Spanish because I didn't think it was very good. And I kept telling people that I was embarazada, which is a false cognate. It sounds like it means embarrassed, but it actually means pregnant. So I was walking around this party saying to people like, oh man, I'm pregnant, and like drinking beer, and people were like, all right, whatever, lady, and eventually somebody kind of whispered to me like, hey, that doesn't mean embarrassed, that means pregnant. And we all had like a good laugh, and I was able to laugh at myself, and then, life went on. But even though I was able to laugh at it, and even though it is objectively very funny, I still felt embarrassed. I felt different. I felt left out. I felt misunderstood. I felt stupid. I felt, like I didn't belong. I felt kind of lonely. Like it made me feel a lot of things, even though I was able to laugh at myself. So I would love for you guys to share some stories about a time in your life when you didn't feel like you could communicate, and then share with the group, please, how it made you feel. And I'm going to stop the slides now so that we can look at each other and talk to each other while we have this conversation. Okay, any volunteers?
Yeah, I would love to share, but so it has happened pretty much what you said about the term embarrassed. I am Hispanic. I am from Venezuela, but with the term molestar. In Spanish, molestar is just to annoy someone, and in English is, if you translate it like with the same word, it would be a completely different thing, molesting. And but this was thankfully in the time when I was learning English. So my teacher just told me, well, you don't say that in English, and if you go to the United States, because it was in Venezuela, don't say that. But and it made me feel in that moment, it just made me feel very curious about how language how languages and how translations can work. I was young, but still, but in any case, what happens to me very often is that, and still, is that I try to say something, and I'm such a freak with my own language that I want to say it as clear as possible, and as clear as possible, or as explicit as possible. And sometimes I just can't. I try to respect as much as I can the English language, and I try not to say inaccuracies. But for me, it's still difficult. I feel like I will always be an English learner, as you refer to persons like me that are constantly trying to learn the best English possible. And sometimes I see friends of mine that actually write in English, that are native Spanish speakers, and actually write perfectly in English. And I say, how can they do that? I couldn't do that ever in my life. It's just too different for me. And I know that I could make mistakes writing. If I make mistakes talking, I can imagine that I could make the same or worse mistakes when writing. So it's frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. Frustrating is definitely a word I hear a lot in these conversations, as well as different and difficult, which are things that you mentioned. And these are, these are pretty much universal feelings, and they're very valid. And I really appreciate you sharing that.
I want to share one incident about without understanding two different languages. In Akron, Ohio, over here, the Nepali population is growing. Bhutanese Nepali population. I'm one of Nepali too, and the kids are playing in the ground. They speak their own language, even though they're playing with the different group of kids from different dialogue or different. Some are English speakers, some are different language speaker, and there's an incident happened. So I always remember about without understanding the language, it caused problem. The Nepali kids is saying in excuse me, it is not good in English language, but it is is very good in Nepali. They say beach mahan. That means you have to play that ball in the middle. Beach mean middle in Nepali. So the English kid understand the Nepali kids is saying beach to them. So they fight each other, and we we have to go over there and make them understand what they are talking about. They are not actually saying someone beach, but they are saying play in the middle, not go on the side. So sometimes the language difference also cause a problem, even though we understand what is going on. So
That's a great, yeah. And how do you think that the children felt in this situation?
actually, they fight each other because the other kids think that they are saying bad word for them. So we, the adult, need to go over there and make them understand, hey, this beach in Nepali doesn't mean bad word. That means you have to play in the middle. So,
That's a really good example of misunderstandings that can cause people, real problems. And so we talk about why people are so tired, right? This is one of the reasons. I'd love to get a few more if anybody else has stories they can share.
I'll share. So my boyfriend speaks very little English, Spanish, and my mom has very limited English skills, but they get along really well. So I have to go in and translate their conversations, and it can sometimes be so difficult because I don't really fully know how to sometimes translate something he's trying to tell her, or something, she will sometimes use a saying of our country or something. And it's I have no idea how to really translate that into English words. So I think that leads me to the point where I feel I'm stuck between these two very different cultures, these two very different languages, which I think is a very common theme of immigrant children. Regardless of whether you're an immigrant from Latin America or from Asia or Africa, you sometimes feel I'm kind of in the middle of everything and not sure where you fully belong, or you try to feel like you belong everywhere. So that's my story.
Yeah, and there's such a discussion to be had here about language and identity also, right? That can be painful for people beyond just the surface difficulties. So thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I can share. Hi.
Hi.
When I first came here, 4 years ago, I could barely speak English. So one experience was like, I was just trying to communicate with English, people who speaks English. And I was like, when it was hard for me to find a word, I was like trying to say it in French or Asian Creole. And I was expecting at least this word, like the similar words was like the same in English. So like I was like for example, summary in Asian Creole we said resume. I was like resume. I was like trying to really change my word to make it fit like the English way. And it was like hard at the beginning. And I think English learners, it's like a way for us to really try to improve our vocabularies. And this is like a struggle when you first started to learn English.
Yeah, I like that you use struggle, because I feel like that's a word that I've heard a lot over and over whenever I've done this exercise before in trainings with people. And so to be respectful of everybody's time, I'm just going to kind of go back quickly. I should have left my slides open. I don't know what I was thinking. Okay, I'm just going to go back to this slide here. And the reason I like to connect these dots is to, like I said earlier, kind of root this work in empathy, right? Where we're not just thinking about checking a box, right? Language access is important. We're going to do it. We're going to check the box and say that it's done. It's about ongoing, deliberate, difficult work to build communities and to make people understand that they are a part of something, right? That they are welcome. Not make as in the forceful term, but all of these services, and this is just scratching the surface of services that people need to use communication in order to access. All of these feelings that you guys shared, right? I wrote down just from our brief discussion here: embarrassed, stupid, outsider, lonely, like I don't belong, frustrated, other, mistake, hard, in the middle, not sure where I belong, isolated, curious, afraid, different, difficult, problem, self-conscious, causing a fight, misunderstanding, stuck, confused, painful, and struggle. Those are the feelings you guys described. And that's how people feel every single time they try to access any of these services that you see here, right? And so I think it's really important, again, to think about this not just as a set of actions, not just as tangible support, but as a real link for people to be able to integrate and to thrive and to survive, and to do so as part of a community and not as an outsider, right? So that is what language justice is, and that is what language access is. And that's why this conversation is so important. And I think that as we move through these workshops and we talk about how to work with interpreters, and we talk about how to build a community engagement strategy, and we talk about evaluating the effectiveness of our programming, and we talk about the different kinds of supports available, do it all rooted in this notion that people are in pain and people are living on the fringes. And even well-meaning advocates, I think, can overlook the importance of communication and of language in that narrative, right? So that's my presentation for today about language access and about how vital it is and how important it is. And understanding this can help you guys really make a difference, right? And I think one other thing I want to bring up today about positive language has to do with all of you. And I hear all the time in trainings and in workshops and when I do consulting for cities and hospitals, people beat themselves up and say like, oh man, we're doing a really poor job, or man, we're not doing enough, or oh, our language access program is terrible, right? But I think that reframing that and being a little kinder to ourselves is also really important, right? Because you're here. Right? This work is new for everybody, right? Even 10 years ago, language access was not such an important conversation. I mean, it's always been as important as a conversation, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the last 10 years, it's become a much more marked problem. And the rates of growth within English learning communities are, continuing to grow. And so this is becoming more and more of an issue. And my point with that is that 10 years ago, this was not maybe on everybody's radar. And it's becoming very apparent now, and especially during COVID, when we have important information and emergency information and public health information that we have to get to people, that this is a major issue. So I wouldn't expect you guys to understand the difference between simultaneous and consecutive interpretation. And I wouldn't expect you guys to know how to work with interpreters and what the different tools are and how to use the different technologies and, the difference between an English learner and limited English proficient, right? This is all new for all of us, and we're all doing the best that we can. And so I think that another important conversation to have is one of, patting yourselves on the back for being here and for trying and for doing your best. And so we can only go up from here. And you guys are starting at a baseline of like real empathy, and you care, and you're really changing things just by virtue of that. So, I think as humans, we're really good at beating ourselves up when we're not doing enough or when things are going badly, but we're not very good at saying, hey, we're doing something awesome, or I did a good job here. So I'm here to say that you guys are doing a good job and a great thing just by being here. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation with you. So that being said, we have 10 minutes now to have Q&A, to have discussions. So I would love to hear if you guys want to share, where you're from and what you guys are doing with language access. If there's something special that you've done that has worked that you want to share with the group. Or if you just came into this not knowing about language access and something changed now. I mean, just really anything that you think is relevant. I would love for you to speak up and for everybody in the group to share their experience and knowledge with each other.
Okay, I'm here.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Bhim Dungana, originally from country of Bhutan. Now from Akron, Ohio. I work for International Institute of Akron, and I'm the interpreting coordinator, and I'm the course certified CCSI interpreter in Nepali. So over here in Akron, I start as an interpreter in the beginning. There are not many provider know about their legal responsibility to provide interpreter for non-English speaking patient. So we advocate over here, and we try to make them understand we not only provide interpreter over here, we go to the field, to the doctor office or their seminar, and we explain about importance of having an interpreter, not only bilingual person or a family member who can speak English. Now over here, the most of the major hospital, they know their role. They always, even though the bilingual patient speak English, they still request an interpreter. But some of the doctor, they they want to save some money, but we are trying to advocate for them so that they will not be a problem of legal problem later. Because if they are using some kind of the federal Medicaid, Medicare, if they accept that and they do not provide an interpreter and cause any problem, it is not only about $200 or $100. It might be if anybody sue, it will be a million case. So we are trying to educate the people, because a lot of people do not know at the beginning. It is learning curve on the interpreter side as well as patient side, and also for the healthcare staff and healthcare worker. If they do not hear about it, they do not know. So we do not try to force them, but we try to educate and advocate both. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And there's this sort of delicate balance about what I call getting buy-in from stakeholders. And that can be getting buy-in within your own organizations, right? Like convincing other directors that you work with or people from other departments within a city government to get on board and to, work toward language access, because a lot of the times people don't get it and don't want to. Or they're busy, or they have a lot going on. So getting buy-in from them is one thing. Getting buy-in from funders is another thing, right? Getting a city to appropriate budgetary funds to language access is not easy. Sometimes you do have to talk about, look, we could get sued, and getting sued is a lot more expensive than proactively providing language services, right? And that's a difficult conversation to have. And getting buy-in in that regard is its own kind of delicate balance. And then there's getting, quote, buy-in from frontline staff, like Bim was saying, like nurses, doctors, they don't necessarily understand that you can't use children and family members as an interpreter, or why, right? And so learning that yourself and being able to explain that to people goes a really long way in advocating for language services. So those are all really great points, Bim, and thank you for sharing from the perspective of somebody who is in charge of interpreters and works to coordinate interpreters, because I know that is a conversation that comes up all the time. Does anybody else have any comments or stories they want to share? We've got about 5 minutes left, and you don't have to, but I'm sure everybody can relate or would be happy to hear if you do.
Hi, this is Alejandra Martinez from the city of Dallas. How are you?
Hi, good.
I just want to share that, well, I am the lead of the Virtual Language Center of Excellence. We created this officially as a COVID response, and we're expanding the team, we're expanding the access for everybody. So one of the things that I just want to share is that one issue that I'm being encountering is trying to explain to, or trying to make understand non-other languages speaking, for calling in a way, is that for us to translate, transcreate, or work in another language, it takes time and effort. People think they come to us and we're trying to make it understand, and we are creating a menu of services and trying to get a buy-in from everybody. Is that, okay, don't come to me and just tell me because it's just 3 lines that we're going to be an automatic tool that is going to translate, because even automatic tools, they make mistakes. So that's one of the things that we are trying to make people understand, because sometimes they come to us with 40 pages PowerPoint presentation they want to buy the next day, and in different languages. So that's the thing that that we have been trying to educate people on. But it's I think this is an never-ending story, because if you don't speak another language, you will never understand how time consuming, because sometimes, and I mean, sometimes we can have a 10 pages and it could be very easy, but we can have a.
Oh, I think we lost, I'm having trouble hearing you there.
Yes, we lost her.
Yeah, we lost.
I think we lost her.
But if you're still listening, I want to totally agree with you. And I want to say that, yeah, I mean, I teach applied translation and machine translation, and it's it's so hard to explain to people who don't inhabit this world that machine translation, it actually does an okay job for some language pairs for information that's not vital. But for other language pairs, it does a terrible job. It doesn't understand, pragmatic equivalence. It doesn't capture context. And it's a tool that is useful, but you have to know how to use it, right? And I think, we get requests all the time for people, like you were saying, Alejandra, that, oh, I have this, 100-page document. Can you translate it for me by tomorrow? And people just have no idea what goes into this work. And I think that's kind of endemic of part of this whole problem, which is just that we need to advance the culture of accessibility. We need to advance the culture of language access, so that people understand, just like with the ADA compliance comparison, like it's not a perfect metaphor, but we've had 30 years since ADA was enacted to build culture. And now people get it, and people know how to use the tools, and people at hospitals know how to use the ASL cart. And that's just something that is not part of the narrative yet for language access. And that's one of the things that my whole career is about. It's just about advancing that narrative and advancing a culture of accessibility. And I'm really thrilled whenever people show up, especially when things like this are so well attended, because it says to me that other people care about this too, right? And we're the ones who are building the culture. We're the ones who are advancing that narrative. And so I really appreciate that you guys are all here to do this work with me. And I think that's a great place to end, because that's what we're doing, right? Just by virtue of being here, we're learning so that we can teach others. We're learning so that we can master the skills we need to improve accessibility and language justice. So thank you guys so much. Anthony, I don't know if you have any final comments. I am going to export the slides today, and I will send them to Anthony to share with membership. And it was so nice to meet you all.